I know a lot of times I don't talk much and I don't I'm kind of more of the observer. And part of it was, as a young person, I was in learning disabilities. My language was a barrier for me. So photography became that tool for me. So I'm happy I was able to use this tool and continue to use this tool.
Welcome to our Latina Lens podcast, where we elevate the work and stories of Latina and Latine photographers in the United States. I'm your host, Monica. I had the pleasure of seeing today's guest, San Jose-based Mexican-American photographer Ismelda Josie Lepe's work at a recent opening for her series, La Cena. She had captivating large-scale images of diverse Latine families and individuals having a meal. I love the dignity and the intimacy with which she showed her subjects. Josie has been a photojournalist for over 20 years, and she is often on assignment as a sports photographer, one of the few Latinas who are in that field. She has earned the respect of her peers, her audience, and she's received numerous awards for her work. The show notes right in your podcast player are a source for links to Josie's work, a transcript of this episode, and more about our Latina Lens. You can also go to ourlatinalens.com/podcast to get that information. So thank you, Josie, for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you today.
I was so excited to find, when I was looking at different photographers and Latina photographers, that you are a sports journalist, that you have incredible photos of professional sports, college sports, and I'm so excited to hear your journey of how you came to be a photojournalist. So could you talk a little bit about your journey to photography, where you started and how you got into photojournalism?
Way back in high school, photography was like an opening tool for me for communication. I was in learning disabilities classes. Like I had dyslexia and I struggled with reading and language. I was an immigrant from Guadalajara. I came here when I was really young, but we went back and forth to Mexico. So I'm originally from Guadalajara, Mexico, and grew up here with dual language. And language has been an issue for me. But in high school, photography became like this wow moment, I wanted to express myself. It was easy. Photography was kind of one of those things that I gravitated in passion. And so Adams was my inspiration. National Geographic was my inspiration. But, I was going to school and working. I'm like, how am I going to do this? They told me I could never go to college. College was out of the picture for me because of my disabilities. But every time someone told me I couldn't do something, so it pushed me even more to try and get into college, to try and figure out a way. So I got into college actually with the Equal Opportunity Program, and I did the fine art realm. I still hadn't found photojournalism, but I was more like a documentarian, and I found that in high school and doing football or yearbook, and I really didn't do yearbook, but I submitted images for yearbook. It was just more about people, documenting the people around me. So I continued with that. And in college, documentary was part of my repertoire, but I wasn't really in journalism. But I knew that if I wanted to be a photographer, I needed to learn the technical skills. So at San Jose State, I really learned the digital technology, whatever skills I could pick up, work in the lab, I did it all. So that opened the doors for me as a lab tech at the Mercury News. And fresh out of college, I got a part-time job being a lab tech. And my job was, which is funny now, to go to Candlestick, pick up the film, because at that time there was still film, pick up the film, come back, process it, scan it, and for the next day's paper. So I would go at halftime to Candlestick. Now that, looking at those images and those rolls of film that I was developing, opened my passion for sports photography. So it was different. And I was like, well, how can I get to do this? I didn't have journalism background. I just was a photographer. My skills were about doing studio photography. So I was also hired to do all the product shooting at the beginning. So product shooting and go pick up film. That was my journey and the beginning of sports photography for me. Coming back, editing all the film, helping, scan with an editor, helping develop it. It opened the door for me to the passion of photography. And then I started, okay, how can I go to the games, wait for them, maybe practice a little shooting and come back and develop the film? So once I started that process and I was okay, they let me do it, I would drive over there, practice a little bit and come back. So I started like more and more on my own, trying to get better at sports photography. And I love that. It was capturing the moments in time. You weren't creating like this fantasy world or doing some kind of fine art work, right? You were just documenting what was happening in front of you. And that passion started in 1999 working for the Mercury News. And, throughout the years, it took me a while to become a full-time staff photographer. I took a class, I practiced. I would do my general work with studio photography, the scanning, the lab work, and then there was cuts, journalism changed, and more opportunities opened the doors. I'm thankful for Jerry Miglitz, who saw the passion that I had and let me have some opportunities in journalism. My first road trip was going to the Detroit hockey. Most people did not like to go to Detroit and cover a hockey playoff. And that was like my first experience on the road covering sports. And it was, a challenge. It was scary at first, but then, you kind of go, you can do this. This is what you wanted to do. And you push through. This is how I saw it. And I dealt with I was in Detroit. I was a female. I was Latina. I got a little harassment in the stadiums, oh, you're a girl. You can't put remote cameras. I've had someone else get scared and come back. And I said, I can do it. I've done this before. I was setting up remote cameras, which it was a thing that you're up like hundreds of feet up above in the skyline of a stadium, and you're setting up cameras to trigger down while you're down on the ice level to capture over the head. And they're like, there's no way you're going to do this. And I'm like, give me a chance, take me up there and, let me see if I can do this. And they were like, and afterwards, the gentleman that took me up there, he's like, whoa, I'm really surprised that you were able to do this. Most people are always scared. I've had men come back down that were scared of the height and setting up remote cameras. I have to do a job and this is what I do. And I followed through. And it wasn't, at first you get a little bit intimidated because they don't have faith in you. You're a woman. It's always like, you're a woman. You can't do this, or you're not good enough. You don't have the experience. And I'm like, well, we need to give it a chance in order for us to get that experience, right? We're not going to become great sports photographers if we don't get the experience to do it. For me, it was always a passion. I'm not a sports fan, so it's kind of like
that was going to be one of my questions to you. Are you a sports fan? Is this something you love being part of?
No, the funny thing is that I'm not a sports fan. I love photographing sports, but I don't really watch it on my personal time. It's just too busy. Life is always too busy to sit down and watch a sports game. Once I used to be able to watch a hockey game. I used to like to watch the Stanley Cup playoffs. During playoffs, it's a whole different game. The fans are really get into it. And when I was in Detroit and covering the playoffs, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. This is not your spot. Sometimes you have to respectfully say, I was given this position to shoot from and you have to stick with it. And if you have, talk to the person in charge. So there's a lot of that ego playing and trying to challenge you. But I see that it completely has changed now. It's more open to women to shoot for sports. I see more and more openings and more women doing it. But I definitely do not see Latinas doing it. I mean, there's very few sports photographer Latinas. I've seen more men come up doing sports photography than women. And it's always easier for men to get into photojournalism.
What is it specifically about sports photography? I imagine at the newspaper you were exposed to lots of different kinds of photography. What was it about sports specifically that attracted you and like, this is where I want to be? I want to be taking these sports photos.
With the Mercury News in the 90s, they were known for you had to have the capabilities of doing everything from sports, from news. You were portraiture. In order to be at the Mercury News in the 80s and 90s, you had to be one of the top photographers. So it wasn't just sports. I wanted to be able to do sports and great sports portraiture, right? Lighting. It's a skill. And to me, even today, it's one of those skills you're always learning. You're always challenging yourself. You're always trying to get better. I still don't consider myself. I feel like I haven't reached the kind of level I want to be at yet. I feel like I'm still learning and challenging myself all the time. But there at the Mercury News, they had a system. You were part of the union. You worked a certain hours and you worked a certain shift. So I was the 12 to 8 or the 2 to 10 shift. And most of the time it fell with sports. So most of the sports assignments, most of the breaking news stuff that happened in the evening. During the day, they did a lot of business assignments covering education. So it was just the beat because I was fresh and I was young. It used to be that was the schedule I was given. It took me, I was still 20 years later, almost still in the evening shift. It wasn't until they were doing some cuts that they wanted to switch me to the day shift towards the end. But my shift was always 2 to 10, 4 to midnight. That's when all the sports photography. Once in a while, I get switched and say, hey, we need a Spanish speaker. They still don't have too many Spanish speakers downtown in San Jose. I was one of the only ones that was a Spanish speaker. There's a few that are, bilingual. That was a native tongue, right, of a Spanish speaker. I would get those kinds of assignments. But for sports, for me, was one of those passions things that it was about the decisive moment, capturing that moment and the celebration, the jubilation. And still today, I'm always trying to find that moment, like the celebration. It's not so much the action moment. Actions happen all the time, but you always get blocked by somebody. Somebody comes into the frame. But getting that celebration or dejection moment, it's different. For me, it's always been about that moment. Most sports photographers want the greatest action moment. And for me, it's been about the reaction and celebration of people, the humanity of the sport, right? It's always about, there's always a winner and always a loser. So it's that moment that I look for. Through my journey in journalism, these last, 20 years of working, over 20 years of working, I think the last 10 years have been really focused on me trying to be the best sports photographer, because I did a lot of studio product shooting. I did a lot of portraiture, social, like the mariachi festival. I think I covered the mariachi festival for 10 years. For me, that was a passion that I liked to do because they sometimes didn't want to cover it. And I always covered it as a feature picture, do a slideshow, because those were the part of celebration of our culture that most of the time they like to celebrate once in a while, and then they don't put it on the newspaper again, right? So it's always the negativity that ends up showing in newspapers or in the media. So for me, the celebration, the education of sharing culture, because mariachi festival, the dancing, it's all part of the culture and celebration of our community. So I always felt like that needed to be documented and needed to be represented in the media. But sports, because of my beat, has been my strongest work.
And when you say in the last 10 years, you've really worked to be the best sports photographer you can be, what does that mean for you?
Research, looking at other work, getting the right gear to do the images. Whenever you're doing a job, I kind of look at other people's work. I look at what they're doing. A lot of the Associated Press, Getty. If I know I'm going to cover football and I don't know the team, right? So I got to look up who's the coach, because, sometimes I don't know the coach or who's the owner. So there's moments if I didn't know the coach, then I'm not, I won't know who he is and I can't cover him. So this last 49ers game, the image of the Dallas coach actually putting the hand on a TV camera, was captured because my job was to follow the coach. So I look up people and what they look like, other images of them. So I know I'm aware of them. So it's kind of like that making sure I know what I'm doing, the history, like looking at the history of sports photography and what people before me have done.
You mentioned that taking a great photo for you means showing the humanity in sports, right? Showing the humanity of the players or the coaches. When you think about a great sports photo that you really admire, what are the elements of that show that?
One, it has to have great composition, but not necessarily perfect. It's about capturing that human moment, that decisive moment. It's either the celebration, like someone like a great smile, a great celebration, whatever shows their personality. There's people that celebrate that really they show their tongue, they drop all their defenses, and the image of their personality really shows. But then there's those that don't show emotion. It's about that emotion, capturing that emotion that they have during this like great moment. They completely lose themselves. It's about that. You need the action. You need the decisive moment of like dejection, celebration. In journalism, you're trying to get the action. There's like 3 or 4 things you're trying to look when you're doing sports photography, right? A great You have to be creative. There's a thing that AP photography, like the photographers there are amazing at capturing great sports action. They're looking for the celebratory, their dejection. It's like, you got to be like on top of everything. Those images are always like top notch for me. And people, most of those guys, they don't think about composition. It just happens. They already know what they're doing. Marcio Sanchez, he just run the Pulitzer. He's a Latino. He's a great sports photographer for the Associated Press. He's always capturing that moment. He's quietly looking. It's like a hunting and gathering situation, right? To find those things you're looking and you're scoping and you're thinking. That to me, when I see his work, I always see like excellence. So I really always admire, and I consider him a colleague because he was here in the Bay Area, and while I was also working with the Mercury News, we had good respect for each other. But I really, his work has always been amazing to me. He's always been good inspiration. But I worked with a lot of great photographers at the Mercury News. Jim Gensheimer, and he's always been a mentor to me, and Pat Tehan. They were always mentors. These were the men. They were already established as great photojournalists for the Mercury News. And Karen Borcher, she's one of the original women in photojournalism in the 80s that was doing sports photography. She was also a great mentor. So I also have those that I looked at their work. They were amazing photographers, and I always question. I asked. I was always there. If you need help, I would kind of tag along. Hey, you need any help? I'm not working today, or I'm not doing anything. I mean, sometimes perhaps I was violating union rules, but I wanted to learn. I had that passion. So looking at those photographers that had excellent skills and learning from them was also an inspiration. The other thing I was given when I started was I had to help Richard Wisdom. He was one of the great original. He started journalism with a 4x5 camera, speed graphics like the original, and went all the way to digital. So he was one of like the original journalism. Like he went through the whole spectrum of film, 4x5, one shot, right, to digital. And he was kind of older. He used to cover a lot of basketball and hockey, and I would help him even with setting up lights. Like they would set up lights, and I learned a lot from other photographers that I thought, to me, they were like the best, right? And they inspired me to become what I wanted to become. Be the best photographer I can be. There's always going to be someone better, and you're always going to be learning. I feel like I'm one of those people that I say, I want to be in school forever. I want to be learning always. It makes you actually a better photographer to keep on learning, right? It makes you grow.
You mentioned briefly your cultural heritage. Can you speak a little bit more about where your family's from, your journey, and how your culture has affected your journey in photojournalism and photography?
So my family immigrated here in the 70s, and I feel very lucky that we had the opportunities we had compared to the immigration laws and everything now. I was able to become a citizen at a young age. My family comes from this small town called Pihuamo, Jalisco, and it's next to Colima, Ciudad Guzman. And I learned a lot about my culture actually here in the United States than I did over there as a young child. They were very much like a ranch community. It's a small pueblo, what they call it. I feel like my culture I embrace it, and I've learned a lot of about my culture as I've gotten older in college. Like I didn't know about tamales until like I was in college, and I'm like, tamales? We don't make tamales during Christmas. We used to make pozole, or tacos de papa, enchiladas. Like it was a little bit different for me growing up because we were like a very service industry. I grew up, my family, we didn't do the farm thing. My family came here, were waitresses. Like my aunts were all waitresses. They worked in the restaurants forever. It was a different cultural upbringing, I think, for me. And then I grew up in downtown. Like downtown since the 70s has been my home, and I still haven't left. I'm still in downtown San Jose. It's called the barrio. I call it my barrio. It was not an easy trying to be an American, right? It's not an easy journey for any immigrant. I was going to high school and working to survive. My mom was a single mother. My father was not in the picture. It was always about work, work, work. Now, when I went to college, I still have this, why are you going to college? What are you going to do in college? You're just getting in debt. They didn't value, and I feel like sometimes they're people from the pueblo, so they don't understand education. I don't make a lot of money as a journalist, right? I'm not as a journalist, you do it for the passion, for the cause, not for the money. They don't understand that. It's been a struggle because I'm the one that doesn't have the things that other people have, right, in my family. But my culture for me, it's been about passing on and learning, right? Learning about our culture. And to me, going to college and getting educated has been that journey of learning about my culture and how do I pass down my culture to my children. I feel a lot of times culture is so into ignorance of just working and family, and surviving that we forget about the other things of our culture. But definitely, I mean, our food has been a big passion in my family. But like Day of the Dead was something I learned in college. Like I had no idea about Day of the Dead until college, or maybe I ignored it, or maybe I didn't hear it. I find it that now I try to pass down that culture and guidance to my children. I want them to be educated. I want them to know. I want them to know their history. It's very important that we don't forget our history. And that's for me, I'm trying to find that out. My father wasn't in the picture. His mother was from the Pueblo, and she was like a native Indian. And when I was a kid, I didn't know her. I didn't really connected with her. And I didn't learn about the native part of her culture, right? And now it's like it's completely gone and lost. And I feel that maybe we should have made an effort. My mom should have made an effort to connect us, or I should have made an effort. Maybe it was you're a child and you're not quite sure, or ignorance kind of thing. Our culture is very much a part of us. And I feel like as I'm getting older, I'm connecting more and gravitating to that history by learning more about it, right? And trying to pass it on to my children.
I feel like that's a very common feeling these days for many families, that there is kind of this gap in where there was a lot of assimilation for
Yeah.
various reasons, right? That we don't understand, or it's hard to imagine because now it's much more about reclamation of culture. And I feel the same about trying to bring that knowledge and understanding for my child. And it feels so urgent to not lose it. But I definitely understand the tension there, right? And the feeling of loss when you're not sure about where you came
Yeah.
from.
Yeah, there's definitely a feeling of loss, a feeling of like a loss and emptiness, right? This empty void of wanting to know more about your culture and your family. I know part of my mom's, but definitely know a lot about my mom's family, but I don't know too much about my father's family. But it's that history and wanting to know more about it. The interesting thing is maybe the photography. There isn't many pictures like when growing up. Photography was not something that I saw pictures of our families. Like there wasn't uh, me growing up as a kid with my mom and my dad, or they were together until I was 5, and then I'm the oldest. And then there's no pictures. There's nothing of the family. There's maybe one or two pictures. I talk about in my thesis about the one image of my mother that has stuck with me since I was a kid. But other than that, there wasn't very many. And even like pictures of my grandmother and her family, there's one that I found as in college, trying to look for that. Okay, who are these people? Where did we come from? I know we're from Biwamo, Jalisco, but where are we from? There's talks about Ismelda Lepe. She was my grandfather's niece. She was a daughter of his brother. So there were two brothers, and she was a daughter. She was in film. Like that's the celebrity family kind of thing that I know about. But our families, like from these small towns of, like I said, Ciudad Guzman, the biggest town. By luck, I'm not sure why I was born in Guadalajara. It's like, for some reason, my mom ended up in Guadalajara when she had me. But the rest of the family was born here in the United States when they immigrated in the 70s. They all decided to come over here.
Our next episode is Josie's image tour. She shares 3 iconic images from Bay Area sports and how they're also milestones in her own career. If you haven't already, turn on notifications for this podcast in your podcast player so that you don't miss when it comes out. And you mentioned your thesis. You recently went back for your MFA. Can you talk a little bit about that thought process, having been a photojournalist for decades and having really amazing work? What motivated you to go back to school, and how did your photographic journey go from there?
In 2018, there was going to be buyouts at the Mercury News, and college and going back to graduate school, I started and I did a bachelor's of a BFA in fine arts and photography. Journalism was something I learned afterwards in school. Not I schooled at the profession, right? I learned it on the job and took a couple of classes, but it wasn't my major. And thinking about it, I at the Mercury News, I would volunteer and do Mosaic, which is a high school journalism workshop. And I did it for 5 years before I had my children. And then after my children, now they're a little bit older, I've been doing it the last 3 years, teaching. For me, I remember that my high school teacher was a great influence for me, to making sure I never gave up. Yes, you can do it. There's opportunity. So Miss Reiko Takao, she's still alive. She went to my show. She kind of pushed me, right? So I feel like being able to pass down that knowledge. So education for me was one of those things. If I wanted to teach, if I wanted to pass down this knowledge, I grew as a photographer and by mentoring these high school students during these workshops during the summer. I always wanted to go to graduate school, but I wasn't sure if I could do it. At the time, like, can I really do this? My BFA was really hard for me as a learning disability education. Academia was really hard for me. So I'm like, okay, I wanted to pass down this information. So the only way to do it is to get a master's, right? If I want to be a professor, if I want to teach in the future, I would need a master's. And I always wanted to do it because to me, again, education is important to me and to further my knowledge. Helping students it was an incentive for me to go back to college. And there were some cutbacks. If you were over 20 years at the Merc, you can volunteer for this buyout. And I saw it like, okay, I said, I'm not 50 yet. It's an opportunity for me to start a new career, do something new, and start preparing and maybe go to college while your kids are young, right? Well, I didn't think it was going to be this hard. Having 7, 8-year-olds in elementary school and trying to do your master's, the twins, it was not easy. It was not easy. There was hardships, but going back, and then I was thinking of working on a project I started 15 years ago, which I did, and I was always been about positive representation of Latina women, positive representation in our culture, of all our culture, because I feel there's a lack of that. And I've been doing this since the start. Like, we used to have a Latino little community paper that was part of the Merc. And I did during the Hispanic Culture Month, I did portraits on Latinos in the professions of what they did, like, showing that we are doctors, we're artists, we're teachers, we are here in the community and we contribute in a positive way instead of always the negative stories. So for me, going back to college was that, what do I do as a member of the society, a member of our culture, to represent and pass down this knowledge to the young ones, right? And I feel like you have to kind of get them at high school. I feel like high school, they're really more open to this profession. No, you're not going to make a lot of money, but you're going to do something you love, right? Going back to college, I did my research. Should I get a master's in journalism or a master's in fine arts? And talking to other colleagues, Jim has a degree in journalism, a master's in journalism. He says, hey, there's more opportunities if you have the fine art master's, because you have the profession, the experience working as a journalist. And then I was looking at it and I'm like, oh, that makes more sense. Maybe I should do that. So then I decided to apply to San Jose State because it's close to me. I can handle picking up my children. I looked at the schedule. It was at nighttime. I didn't realize it was a 3-year program, but it ended up working. It ended up working out. It happened right when COVID. I started, and the project that I had started that I wanted to work on women and cars, the passion. It was a passion project I had started way back when it wasn't cool to be a woman in lowriders, right? When it wasn't classics. I've always been passionate about vintage cars because in college I had a 1965 T-Bird in the 90s.
That's awesome.
And I was the only woman, and everybody used to make fun of me because I had this T-Bird, and it was one of those things. I used to ride it, drive it. That was my daily driver, a 1965 T-Bird. So, I found more and more since the 90s to now, more and more women were driving older cars. So there was a time they said, pitch a project at the Mercury News. So I pitched Passion Women in Cars. So I did that series, and I wanted to continue to grow that series. So that was going to be my thesis, and kind of work on the passion of women in cars and Latinas, because it's been part of our culture, low riding, the Mexican American culture. I was very much influenced growing up in downtown. So, but then COVID happened and I couldn't do the project I was planning. So then I knew it was a historic moment, right? As a journalist, you just kind of like, all of a sudden things are happening. I'm like, this is going to be big. It's going to be historic. And I had to turn the camera on me and my family. My partner, of course, he's not into the whole being visual on the camera, but he, participated. But it was mostly about me and being a mother, and through this historic moment, changed the way I was looking at my research. It changed the way, not only my research, the work I was looking at, other people that were doing similar work or have done similar work. It changed to the investigation of me, my culture, being a mother. It became more personal, and it sent me into a new path and direction as an artist. But ultimately, for me, I felt like COVID kind of changed the path of where I could have been or taken.
COVID changing trajectories of life is an understatement, right?
Yeah,
For many of us.
Yes.
I had the honor of going to your thesis show, which was amazing. How did you get from that personal investigation of motherhood, and specifically during the pandemic, to your show La Cena?
Looking at my family. So again, I was this investigation of looking at me and looking at my family. And we have to do like these steps, ATC, which you do your first year advancement to candidacy, and then your thesis. And I did because of, I turned the camera to documenting my family, of what a Latino family looks like during COVID, and the struggles. Kind of, it's kind of like a historic memoir. It's my memoir that I have of during this time. And maybe it's not important right now, but 20 years from now or 100 years from now, we can look at what Latino. And the other thing I noticed is, like, there's not too many records of and images of Latinos. They show the barrio, they always show the barrio of Mexico, or, someone drunk on the floor, typical negativity kind of image, or a family in the barrio, showing being kind of destitute or something, right? So for me, I was like showing the opposite. I'm not rich, but I'm not, I know I'm not poor, but I have a home, and I have a different, it was a different view of our culture, a different view of a Latino family, right? So I knew that was important. So those images of showing my family, okay, there's a cheap gas drive to go to the beach, right? I may not have a lot of money to take them to go play sports, but I can take them to the beach. They can play in the sand. They can be in the water. Well, capturing those moments of them being at the beach, right, or doing something outdoors, all of a sudden the question of what your family doesn't look Latino, because it wasn't your stereotypical Latino family, right? I was doing something different, right? So that came up in conversation during my critiques. And I'm like, well, what is a Latino family supposed to be looking like?
Right.
And I'm like, I'm from Mexico. My kids are Mexican, what are we supposed to be looking like? The stereotypical media image negativity. And of course, there's not too many Latinos in grad school either, right? Maybe there was two of us, two or three of us at the time from different medias that we're all gathered together, and everybody critiques and looks at each other's work. So that question came up. And so then I was like, after doing my ATC, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do? I started thinking about it. I don't have a kitchen table, a dining room, formal dining room. I eat standing up. My kids eat at the little table that we have. We don't have a big kitchen. We don't have a big dining room table. This is what my family does. And that whole question of diversity, right, came into question. I'm like, what if I do a series? Because I think people, again, representation, diversity. We are a diverse culture, right? We're mixed with all kinds of different since the get-go, okay? Our history is not perfect, and I, condemn what we did in the past, but our history now is influenced by the history from the past history, right? The mixing, the mestizos, the natives mixing in with the Spanish, with whoever came in and conquered. And there's been this kind of people mixing since the get-go. Even if we look at our culture here in America, it's very diverse as the melting pot. Since people have been mixing in, and I feel like I wanted to show a positive representation of the diverse community of all Latinos, because people, it's not just Mexicans, right? We have Puerto Ricanos, we have Cubanos, we have people from Brazil, we have Argentinos. There's like all this diverse community that flourishes, right? That everyone brings in these differences, but ends up being like a beautiful culture, right? A very colorful culture in a sense. If we look at all the celebrations that everybody has, I wanted to focus on the Latinas of our community in the Bay Area, and how diversity is so thriving, right? It's like we have all this thriving, but I wanted to show the pictures of people see, okay, this is a family, and the commonality, because food within all of Latinx culture is a big part of our family's affairs, culture, gatherings, food, and all these different foods come from different places. From looking at my family and someone questioning my identity, I decided to work on these portraits. And I had basically a semester and a little bit of the summer to try and get as many people of a diverse group that I wanted to be part of my show and my thesis. But it came out of a question of someone questioning, what is your family doesn't look brown enough.
Yeah. And you captured such a beautiful diversity of people eating That was the commonality, but also just these various tableaus of folks at their tables or wherever they ate, and really conveyed commonality and difference in such a beautiful way in the portraits that you created for that thesis show. Are you continuing that series, or is that something you've encapsulated as part of your master's and you're done with that project?
I am continuing the series, and I'm trying to find a diverse group. I have one that I'm trying to get a hold of right now to create something that's not an easy one, but covering the storms and, the unhoused and the community and what makes them a family. It's one of the ones I'm trying to capture right now of a group of people I'm talking with, but that's always a hard one. Yeah, no, I'm still continuing that project. I took a little break during the holiday. Everybody was sick, and graduation, like my house really got hit with COVID, the flu, some other weird virus, and graduation, the holidays, and
so much was going on during that time.
yeah. And then January's been, it was the storm coverage. I jumped in and helped with a lot of the storm coverage. But now, and in the last couple of days, I really was thinking about creating and reaching out to other people that say that they were interested, because I'm hoping by some folks seeing what I've already done, they can actually want to participate. And I just want to make it better. It's a lot easier to photograph one or two people, right? Versus when it's a larger group and in small contained areas, it's a little bit more difficult. I do want to continue with the project because I think it's important. It's an important part of the community. And I think it's important that people see that we have our differences, but we all share a lot of commonalities, being part of American and living the American dream here in the United States.
I'm so glad to hear you're continuing. I can't wait to see what you create. Being a photojournalist, a Latina photojournalist, as long as you have. You've told me before that it's important to you to inspire and educate the next generation of Latina photographers. If a Latina is thinking about getting into sports photography, what would be your advice? Because you've said there's still not very many out there. What would be your advice to someone that's hearing this and is saying, that sounds really interesting to me? How do I get into that?
If you're really interested in journalism and sports photography, start with do a couple of journalism classes, take some journalism kind of core black classes, and then find a mentor, find someone. I was lucky enough that I had a staff to look up to and guide me through these, like mentoring, right? Like asking questions, getting, don't expect someone go, hey, hook a woman up and I want a job kind of thing. Because I've gotten those recently Instagram messages. You have to, one, show that you're really passionate about it. You want to learn, go to school, and then also find a mentor. Find those that can help you. There is organizations, National Press Photographers Association, that they have these workshops. Do whatever workshop that you can find, and also reach out to people. Hey, I would like to shadow you. Can I come and help you? To me, the important part is to get involved with some journalism organization. There's a nonprofit, the Mosaic, that I volunteer and we teach, and young ones. You can come and sit and watch the lectures and help with the students, even if you're just driving. But reaching out to those, if you also admire someone's work, say, hey, I really admire your work. I really would love to get some advice from you.
If someone is in the field now and fortunately still maybe having some of the challenges that you had, being a woman in the sports photography field or being a Latino in the sports photography field, what helped you get through all of those challenges? It sounded like you were very sure about where you wanted to be and proving to folks that you could go as high as you needed to go to stay as long as you needed to stay. But for those who may still be going through some of the challenges you went through, what helped get you through? What advice do you have for them?
Not listening to the negativity, but have a goal. I had a goal. I said, I'm going to try, and if someone say no to me, I just saying, hey, I will keep trying. I want to keep getting better. It's not giving up, but having the conversation and communication with editors. those who open the doors for you. Definitely editors and jobs. The AP or Getty, they have those competitions that they submit. They have portfolio reviews. Get your portfolio seen. There's a new women in journalism group in the United States, and they have a Bay Area chapter, and they meet I think once a month, and they were doing Zoom during COVID, but now they're meeting other women that are doing that, and they're that's what I would recommend. But like, yeah, pushing forward, like not giving up. If you really have the passion and you really want to do it, is reaching out to those and talking to them. For me, it was different because I ignored the negativity and I kept working at it. I just worked, and just my work and my work ethic, I think, opened the doors for me. When I left the Merc and I decided I was going to go back to school and reinvent myself, I got the phone call. They called me to freelance. The freelancing wasn't my idea. It's just people started calling me and can you work? Can you do freelance? And then I ended up somehow figuring it out on my own how to freelance. Asking questions. No question is a dumb question. I sometimes say, I am not sure about this. I'm ignorant about this. Can you tell me more about it? So for me, it was someone say no. I just always try to figure out a way to continue growing, continue the path that I want to do. It's not perfect, and nothing is ever perfect. I am not perfect. I make mistakes, and you learn from those mistakes, definitely. But as a woman, I would say, there was a time someone said, well, what do you do in those kinds of instances? I ignore men when they gawk at me or they say something at me. I've gotten pushed, hit, spit on, and I just ignore it. Because the minute you come forward, and it becomes like a fight or aggravation. So that it's different. For me, I ignored it. Today, most people won't ignore it, right? But the times are different. When if I would have said something or done something at the time, there was no way I would still be in the business now. And I think that's the difference now, that it has completely changed. There's more opportunities for women. There's more respect, and people are aware of the Me Too, right? For me, it was a little bit different. I ignore the naysayers. If they spit on me, I just kept going on doing my work, right? If they pushed me, I definitely stopped and say, hey, back off. I was very direct, and I stood my ground. So I guess, but it's very different now than it was when I was doing it.
That makes sense.
And I feel the change. It's a good positive change. And I think it's more beneficial for women now.
We're glad there's a change. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that and feel you had to hold that kind of abuse, right? And I'm glad it's changing and it's different. Do you have any Latina photographers that you really love that you think our listeners should know about?
Iturbe, Graciela Iturbe is a great one to look back at our history. And I always love that she did a positive representation of our culture, right? I feel like that's really someone to look at the history and really like study her work,
And are there any Latina businesses that you want to give a shout out? We're all about elevating each other and supporting each other. Is there anyone you want to let people know about?
The work that, like Mosaic Journalism, which is a high school journalism program that minorities within the newsroom started 30 years ago, and we all have contributed. Joe Rodriguez, Sharon Noguchi. These are all like different nationalities that come together to make sure that the youth of today gets the opportunity to be journalists and also be the voice for their people. And I think we contribute, pass down our knowledge, and those kind of programs that continue to strive, passing on, educating journalism or culture, are the programs that I really support and hope and that people will contribute and continue to pass on this knowledge, inspire young artists, young journalists. The other thing is like teachers, you have people like artists that are, Yolanda Guerra. She's a high school teacher. She's an artist. She's into politics. Her work is about our culture and our people and sharing that message about our culture. People like that is, they're all around us. What I hope that inspires me and inspires others, to continue our message. I'm not so much like you were asking about businesses, but for me, it's more about culture preservation, sharing our message, having a positive light. What you're doing here, like showing Latinas and women, right? It's like when I started the Merc, I wanted to show that we were contributors, positive light, that counter image of women, we're not just here as homemakers, we're also contributors as teachers, mentors, and workers, having that message of positive representation. I know a lot of times I don't talk much and I don't I'm kind of more of the observer. And part of it was, as a young person, I was in learning disabilities. My language was a barrier for me. So photography became that tool for me to share my thoughts and my passion. So I'm happy I was able to use this tool and continue to use this tool. I'm always shy about talking or expressing my thoughts because I feel like I'm going to make a mistake or say the wrong word. But hopefully this helps out. And my message I consider myself a Latina, a photographer, a journalist, an artist, a mother, and hopefully I will inspire others to practice, hone their practice, don't give up. That's my main message. But I wish Mosaic was there when I was a young person, because I definitely would have been there learning from others. And now I like to get back and be part of that.
So Josie, I know, as you mentioned, you're freelancing and that you've got to go on you've been called in on assignment. So thank you so much. It has been such an honor to talk to you, to hear your story. I know there's so much more to tell. You have so much more in you, so many stories, but I really appreciate the time that you've taken to share part of your story with us today.
Thank you, Monica. It's been an honor to be here with you.
I'm excited to share Josie's story in part because she's exactly the kind of photographer I wish I had known about and connected with when I was young and studying photojournalism and was being discouraged at almost every turn. Her continued practice to develop her skill and broaden her perspectives as a photographer is inspiring. Is there someone you know who could use Josie's story and example? Screenshot the info for this episode from your podcast player and send it to a friend, a niece, or a young person in your life. You can also share on your social media channels so that more people know that, yes, Latinas are contributing to our country's visual narrative, including in sports arenas. Gracias for listening. I'm so grateful for you and the time that you've shared with us. This episode was produced and hosted by me, Monica Aldarondo Lugo. Theme music was composed by Matthias Müller, and our podcast logo was designed by Tumpa Mystery. L'Ancla Creative.